On the morning of June 20th, 2001, Andrea Yates called Houston police. She asked them to come over to her house. Police arrived to find her children, Noah, John, Paul, Luke, and Mary, had all been drowned one by one in the family bathtub. Journalist Suzanne O'Malley has been following the case since day one, and in her new book, Are You There Alone?, she asks and answers some of the disturbing questions about the Yates case that has troubled so many people. She mostly asks the question and answers it, could the murders have been prevented? In researching her book, she spoke with more than 100 sources, including Andrea Yates herself, who is now serving a life term in prison. And Suzanne O'Malley, it's a pleasure to welcome you here tonight. Thank you.
Great to be here.
You contend in your book that if she had been properly treated and medically diagnosed, those kids would be alive today.
Absolutely.
That is an astonishing pronouncement. What went wrong?
Well, science of the brain is as much an art at this point as it is a science.
Right.
And she wasn't diagnosed properly until after she'd been in prison for a year. I mean, that's 4 years into the mental illness. She's bipolar. That's the underlying illness. On top of it was postpartum psychosis. But we spent a lot of time looking at other diseases, simple depression, all of that. If that had been diagnosed and medicated properly at the time, this never would have happened. Instead, the medication she was given fueled the kind of energy that would enable a mother to drown 5 children in an hour.
So you say that the medical prescription she was given actually exacerbated her situation and turned her into a killer?
I did not say that it turned her into a killer.
But it gave her the strength to be able to do what she did.
This medication given for simple depression, fabulous. But if you give it unknowingly to someone who's also manic, pushes the mania. And this happens all the time. A lot of times you get away with it. It's trial and error.
This is the story that's so sad because, yes, 5 children died, but yes, there were also so many warning signs. After the birth of her 4th child, she'd had serious depression, and she'd been hospitalized a couple of times. She tried to commit suicide. I don't know how a person can call for help more than Andrea Yates did.
I think this is an, mental illness does not discriminate. I'm telling you, after looking at the records of the Yates family, the Kennedy families, how they tried to help Andrea, if it could happen to them, it could happen to anyone.
You've spoken with Andrea Yates in prison. How is she doing now?
I haven't spoken with her in prison. We've corresponded for about 14 months, and she's up and down. She's written wonderfully poignant things. She has a lot of trouble forgiving herself. Her husband, Rusty, has... She asks him, how do you forgive me? And he said, what if I had been driving a car and I had a heart attack and the kids were all killed in the car wreck? Would you blame me? And she says, no, of course not. And he said, well, there's no difference. Your brain was sick.
And incredibly, he still stands by her.
Yes, he does. He has not missed a visit, nor has her mother, to see her when she's allowed to do so.
Yeah, and her mother said something rather poignant in recognizing that at some point when Andrea gets better, she's going to realize what she did. And I want to put the graphic up there, and this is what she said in an interview with Newsweek. She said, I always had mixed feelings about her getting better, meaning Andrea. When she gets better, she realizes what she's done. Does Miss Yates realize what she's done?
She does. In her wellest moments, she realizes what she's done. She lives to, one of the reasons she corresponded with me was to set the record straight for her family and her husband, on how much they did help. And the other thing is the Yates Children's Memorial Fund, which is dedicated to mental health education for families.
And she talked about that in a letter that she wrote to you, too. I want to throw that up as well. She said, I guess it bothered me that the jury didn't think I was mentally ill, and I was offended that they thought there was a hidden motive. But it was a terrible case, and I'm grateful the jury didn't give me the death penalty. She sounds awfully cogent in that bit of correspondence.
Well, she's only able to write when she is cogent, and we have to remember that one expert at trial testified that Andrea Yates was one of the 5 sickest patients she had ever treated. She had treated 6,000 patients.
And she was one of the 5 or 6
sickest.
Most ill. And yet in Texas, to raise a mental illness defense is virtually impossible to be successful at. It's a very difficult legal road to hoe.
Very difficult, as it is in literally half the states. So Texas is not alone in being a state that's that rigid.
And yet, as sad and awful as the Andrea Yates murder story is, there is actually one little tiny glimmer of hope that in Texas, it's now mandated that mothers be informed about postpartum depression.
Yes, it's called the Andrea Yates Bill.
And what happens to new mothers as a result of this?
There's literature in OBGYN offices and any place where women and children with young children may be. The physicians must inform them.
So maybe some babies' lives will be saved as a result of that.
We certainly hope so.
Suzanne O'Malley, it's a fascinating book and great correspondence with Andrea Yates and
Thank
New
you.
Insight. Thank you for being
Privileged to
with
be
us.
here.
Thank you. We'll be right back.